The cellar beneath the abandoned tannery reeked of human waste and despair. 20 small bodies huddled against the stone walls like broken dolls, their faces bearing the hollow stare of children who had witnessed unspeakable horrors. In the suffocating darkness, a girl no older than 6 suddenly bolted toward the stairs, her bare feet slapping against wet stone as hope overcame terror. Sarah, no, 12-year-old Rose Martinez, hissed, but it was too late. The heavy door above crashed open, spilling sickly yellow lamplight down the stairs. 2 figures descended: Pete Kowalski, a mountain of flesh with dead shark eyes, and his scarecrow-thin partner, who the children called Knife, for the wickedly sharp blade he always carried. Pete's massive hand closed around little Sarah's throat, lifting her off the ground as she kicked helplessly. "Trying to leave the party early, sweetheart?" His laugh was like gravel in a coffin. "That ain't polite." He hurled the child back into the corner, where the others cowered, her small body crashing against the wall with a sickening thud. Sarah lay motionless, blood trickling from her nose, and for a terrifying moment, the other children thought she was dead. 8-year-old Emma Crow Feather pressed herself deeper into the shadows, clutching a torn piece of blue ribbon and the last remnant of the dress her mother had sewn for her birthday. She remembered Uncle Yiska's weathered hands braiding that ribbon into her hair, his deep voice promising in Lakota, "I'll find you, little bird, no matter how far they take you." But that was 3 months ago, and hope was dying in this hellish place. Fresh ones arrived tomorrow night. Pete wheezed to his partner, his breath visible in the frigid air. Judge wants the damaged goods separated from the prime stock. Knife ran his tongue across chapped lips, his eyes lingering on the youngest children. "What about the broken ones? Torch the whole place when we're done. No witnesses, no evidence." Pete's smile was pure malice. Clean slate for the next batch. As the predators climbed back up the stairs, their laughter echoing off stone walls, 20 pairs of eyes watched with the resignation of those who had lost everything. The lock clicked shut with the finality of a death sentence. But in the deepest corner, Emma's fingers tightened around her ribbon, and she whispered the only prayer she had left. "Come find me, Uncle Yiska. Please don't let them win." Above them, the footsteps faded into silence, leaving 20 children alone with their nightmares and the terrible knowledge that tomorrow might be their last day on Earth. Dawn painted Bitter Creek's main street the color of dried blood as Yiska Crow Feather guided his paint stallion through the stirring frontier town. At 32, the Lakota warrior moved with the quiet grace of a predator, his dark eyes missing nothing as they swept over false storefronts and weathered saloons. 3 months of searching had led him here, following a trail of whispered rumors and children's tears. Emma's disappearance from the reservation school had torn a hole in his world that grew larger with each passing day. The official report claimed she'd run away, but Yiska knew his sister's daughter better than that. Ayana's little bird wouldn't have fled into the wilderness alone. Someone had taken her, and that someone had left a trail leading straight to this cesspool masquerading as civilization. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who ran the town's boarding house, watched him with knowing eyes as he dismounted. She'd been helpful during his previous visits, offering information that others wouldn't dare share. But today, something was different about her expression, a nervousness that set his instincts on edge. "Back again, are you?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Still looking for that little girl of yours?" "Still looking," Yiska confirmed, studying her face. "You mentioned last time that you'd seen well-dressed strangers visiting Judge Blackwood's ranch, men who arrive after dark." Mrs. Henderson glanced nervously toward the sheriff's office before nodding. "Every few weeks like clockwork. Fancy carriages, city clothes. They don't stay long, but they pay well for discretion." Before Yiska could press for more details, Deputy Marshal Jake Thornton swaggered out of the saloon, his badge gleaming despite the early hour. The man reeked of whiskey and cruelty, his pale eyes holding the calculating look of a predator sizing up prey. "Oh, well, looky here." Thornton drawled, spitting tobacco juice that splattered near Yiska's boots. "The savage is back. Told you before, Redskin, that half-breed brat ain't here. Probably got herself et by something with teeth." Yiska's hand drifted toward his Colt, but years of survival had taught him patience. "Funny thing about tracks, Deputy. They don't lie like people do." "You calling me a liar, Indian?" "I'm calling you a man who doesn't look too hard for missing children. Makes a person wonder why." Thornton's face darkened, but before he could respond, Mrs. Henderson stepped between them. "Now, gentlemen, no need for harsh words. Mr. Crowfeather, perhaps you'd like some breakfast before continuing your search." As the deputy stalked away, muttering threats under his breath, Yiska noticed something that made his blood freeze. Caught on Thornton's badge was a small piece of blue fabric, the exact shade of Emma's birthday dress. The Bitter Creek, he discovered, was a town built on secrets and willful blindness. Judge Cornelius Blackwood's cattle ranch dominated the valley, its influence reaching into every corner of the territory. The judge himself was the picture of respectability, silver-haired scripture-quoting generous, with donations to build the new church. But Yiska had learned to read the signs of corruption, and they were everywhere in this place. 5 children had vanished from the territory's fringes in the past year, all from families too poor or powerless to demand answers. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it, but most folks found it easier to look away and count their blessings that it hadn't happened to their own. Clara Whitmore was different. The seamstress lived in a weathered cabin on the town's eastern edge, her husband dead from a mining accident, her life dedicated to caring for her daughter Sarah and taking in washing to make ends meet. When Sarah disappeared 2 weeks after Emma, the shared grief had created an unlikely bond between the white woman and the Lakota warrior. "They're somewhere close," Clara whispered when Yiska visited her cabin that evening. "I hear crying at night, carried on the wind from somewhere south of town." "How many voices?" Yiska asked quietly. "Hard to say. Could be a dozen, maybe more." Her grip on his arm was desperate. "There's something else. I've been watching the comings and goings at Judge Blackwood's ranch. Those fancy visitors Mrs. Henderson mentioned, they're not cattle buyers." As Clara explained what she'd observed, men arriving under cover of darkness, staying only a few hours, departing with satisfied smiles and bulging saddlebags, Yiska felt the pieces of a horrific puzzle clicking into place. "Buyers," he said grimly. "God help us," Clara breathed. "They're selling children like livestock." Storm clouds were gathering overhead as Yiska prepared to investigate the abandoned tannery Clara had mentioned. The place had burned the previous year, leaving only ruins and a cellar that still drew his attention. But as he saddled his horse, he couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching, that every move he made was being reported to someone who preferred to keep certain secrets buried. The hunt for Emma was about to take a deadly turn, and Yiska sensed that before this was over, blood would water the prairie grass around Bitter Creek. The only question was whose blood it would be. The ruins of the old tannery squatted on the landscape like the rotting carcass of some prehistoric beast. Yiska approached on foot through the tall grass, using every skill learned in decades of warfare to avoid detection. 3 nights of surveillance had revealed the site's terrible secret: fresh wagon ruts in the mud, the acrid smell of human waste, and most damning of all, the sound of children weeping in the pre-dawn darkness. Now crouched in the shadows, cast by a pale moon, he studied the cellar entrance hidden beneath debris and rotting leather. His warrior's instincts screamed danger, but Emma's face haunted his thoughts, driving him forward despite the risk. Something glinted in the moonlight near his feet, a small object half buried in ash-stained earth that made his heart nearly stop. Emma's blue ribbon, torn and blood-stained, but unmistakably hers. He lifted it with trembling fingers, catching the faintest trace of lavender soap beneath the stench of violence. "Pretty thing, ain't it?" Yiska spun to find 3 armed men emerging from concealment, their rifles trained on his chest. Pete Kowalski stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the moonlight, as he grinned with predatory satisfaction. "That belonged to your little half-breed, didn't it? Sweet child put up quite a fight when we took her." Pete's chuckle was like breaking bones. "Course Judge Blackwood likes him with spirit. Makes the breaking more entertaining." Rage flooded through Yiska's veins like liquid fire, but he forced himself to remain still. 3 against 1, all of them armed and expecting trouble. Emma needed him alive and thinking not dead and heroic. "Where is she?" Yiska asked quietly. "Getting educated in her new profession." Pete replied, savoring each word. "Judge runs a finishing school for young ladies. Teaches them manners, obedience, and how to please discerning gentlemen who pay top dollar for exotic flesh." The implications hit like physical blows. These weren't just kidnappers, they were running a child prostitution ring with Judge Blackwood as the puppet master. Emma and 19 other children were being systematically broken and sold to the highest bidders. "Drop the iron, Chief," Pete commanded. "Judge wants a word before we put you in the ground permanent-like." But as one of his companions approached with rope, Yiska made his move. Survival had taught him that desperate times demanded desperate measures, and Emma's life hung in the balance of the next few seconds. He dove sideways as bullets whistled past his head, rolling behind a pile of debris as the night erupted in gunfire. His hand found a jagged piece of metal, and he hurled it with deadly accuracy at the nearest gunman. The improvised weapon opened the man's throat in a spray of arterial blood. Using the dying man's rifle, Yiska picked off the second gunman with a shot that echoed across the prairie like thunder. But Pete wasn't finished, and the big man charged through the gun smoke with a broken bottle in his hand, roaring like an enraged bear. They crashed together in the ash and mud, fighting with savage desperation as flames from an overturned lantern began to spread through the dry grass. Pete was stronger, but Yiska fought with the fury of a man who'd already lost everything that mattered. When Pete's makeshift weapon slashed toward his throat, Yiska caught the man's wrist and slowly began to squeeze. Bones cracked as he applied pressure, and the bottle fell from nerveless fingers. "The children," Yiska hissed as Pete's face purpled. "Where are they kept?" "Ranch house," Pete gasped. "Cellar beneath Blackwood's mansion. But you're too late, half ship out tomorrow night to buyers in Denver. Rest get disposed of to eliminate witnesses." As Pete's eyes rolled back and consciousness fled, Yiska released his grip and stood over the 3 corpses. He now had confirmation of the trafficking operation and Emma's location, but he'd also signed his own death warrant. By morning, every lawman in the territory would be hunting him for murder. Emma's bloody ribbon fluttered in the night wind as he retrieved his weapons and prepared to disappear into the wilderness. 18 hours to save 20 children from a fate worse than death with impossible odds. And the entire territory turned against him. But as he rode hard through the darkness, one thought burned in his mind with the intensity of a forge fire: Emma was alive. Broken, traumatized, but alive. And as long as she drew breath, nothing on earth would stop him from bringing her home. Thunder rumbled overhead as storm clouds gathered, promising a deluge that would wash away the blood, but not the memory of what he'd learned. The war for 20 innocent souls was about to begin, and Yiska Crow Feather intended to fight it with everything he had. Time was running out. But his promise to Ayanna still burned bright as a star in the darkest sky. Dawn brought no relief from the storm that had hammered Bitter Creek through the night. Yiska sheltered in an abandoned line shack 5 miles north of town, watching search parties spread across the rain-soaked prairie like hunting wolves. News of the 3 dead men had traveled fast, and wanted posters bearing his likeness were already being nailed to every fence post and door. Deputy Marshal Thornton led the largest posse, his voice carrying clearly across the wind as he addressed his men. $500 for the savage's head, dead or alive. Judge Blackwood wants justice for the murder of 3 innocent ranchers. Innocent ranchers. The lie tasted bitter as alkali water, but Yiska knew it would be the only truth most people would hear. He was now branded as a cold-blooded killer, while the real monsters hid behind badges and respectability. Through the cracked window, he could see Mrs. Henderson's buggy approaching the search area. The elderly woman was talking animatedly with Thornton, gesturing toward the hills where Yiska had taken refuge. His blood ran cold as he realized the truth. Mrs. Henderson wasn't the helpful ally she'd pretended to be. She was working for them, had been from the beginning. The trap was closing, but first he needed to confirm what Pete had told him about the children's location. The Blackwood mansion sat like a fortress on its hill, surrounded by armed guards and protected by the authority of law. A direct assault would be suicide, but reconnaissance might reveal a weakness he could exploit. Using the storm for cover, Yiska circled wide around the search parties and approached the estate from the north. The mansion's imposing bulk rose from manicured grounds, its windows glowing with warm light that belied the evil within. But it was the basement windows that drew his attention, most boarded up, but one showing the faint glimmer of lamplight seeping through the cracks. As he crept closer through the muddy grass, a voice that had haunted his dreams for 3 months whispered through the wind. "Uncle Yiska." He pressed his face to the gaps in the boarding, his heart hammering as he recognized Emma's voice. "I'm here, little bird. Your uncle has come for you." "There are others," she whispered back, barely audible through wood and stone. 20 of us in this place. They hurt us every day, Uncle. Some of the little ones are very sick." "How many guards down there with you?" "2 men always stay, more upstairs. They said half of us leave tomorrow night on a train. The rest—" Her voice broke into quiet sobs. Before Yiska could respond, the distinctive sound of rifles being cocked froze him in place. He slowly raised his hands as 6 armed men emerged from concealment, their weapons trained on his head with professional precision. Judge Blackwood appeared on the mansion's front porch, his silver hair perfectly groomed despite the early hour. He descended the steps with the measured dignity of a gentleman hosting afternoon tea, rather than a monster trafficking in human misery. "Mr. Crowfeather," he called in his cultured voice. "How thoughtful of you to visit. I trust you found our accommodations educational." "You sick bastard," Yiska replied quietly. "They're just children." "Their inventory," Blackwood corrected. "Valuable inventory that generates substantial profits for discerning investors. Your interference has disrupted carefully laid plans." One of the gunmen stepped forward with rope. But Yiska had survived 3 decades on the frontier by never surrendering quietly. As the man reached for his wrists, the warrior exploded into motion. The gunfight that followed was brief but vicious. Yiska used the water trough and outbuildings for cover, his precise shooting dropping 2 of Blackwood's men before a bullet creased his shoulder and spun him around. Blood soaked through his shirt as he fought his way toward the tree line, the sounds of pursuit growing closer with each step. "Double the guard." Blackwood's voice followed him into the wilderness. "And move the timetable up 12 hours. I want half those children on tonight's train to Denver." The words hit Yiska like physical blows as he reached his horse. The schedule had been accelerated. He now had less than 10 hours to save 20 children from slavery and death. And he was wounded alone and hunted by every badge-wearing predator in the territory. But as he rode hard through the storm, Emma's frightened whisper echoing in his memory, Yiska's resolve only hardened. The little ones were dying in that cellar, while monsters counted their profits. Judge Blackwood had made a fatal mistake in revealing his timetable. Now Yiska knew exactly when and where to strike. 6 hours until the train departed. 20 children depending on a wounded warrior with impossible odds stacked against him. But sometimes impossible was just another word for necessary. And Yiska Crowfeather had never backed down from a necessary fight in his life. By noon, every soul in Bitter Creek knew there was blood money on Yiska's head. The reward had grown to $700 more than most men saw in 2 years, ensuring that every gun in the territory would be turned against him. Deputy Marshal Thornton coordinated the manhunt with military precision, but Yiska had melted into the wilderness, like smoke, using skills learned in childhood to stay ahead of his pursuers. As afternoon shadows lengthened, desperation drove him to seek help from Clara Whitmore. If she truly wanted to save her daughter, she would have to risk everything. Clara's cabin sat isolated on the town's eastern edge. But something was wrong. Too many horses were tethered nearby, and lamplight flickered in windows that should have been dark at this hour. Yiska approached through her vegetable garden with the caution of a man walking into a trap. When he tapped on her back door, Clara opened it immediately, too immediately, as if she'd been waiting. Her face was pale with fear, but there was also something else in her eyes. Resignation, perhaps, or the look of someone who'd already made an impossible choice. "They have Sarah," she said without preamble. "Judge Blackwood's men came this morning with proof she's alive. Said if I help them capture you, they'll give her back." And you believed them. Clara's composure cracked, revealing the desperate mother beneath. "I had to. She's all I have left in this world." As if summoned by her words, armed men stepped out of the shadows inside the cabin. Thornton emerged from behind the door, his revolver trained on Yiska's chest, while 2 more deputies flanked him from the kitchen. "Should have stayed on the reservation, Redskin." Thornton sneered. "But thanks for making this easy." But Yiska hadn't survived frontier warfare by walking blindly into obvious traps. His dive through the window was explosive, shattering glass and wood as bullets whistled past his head. He rolled across the porch and into Clara's chicken coop, using the squawking birds as cover, while return fire splintered the wooden walls around him. The gun battle that followed lit up the night sky with muzzle flashes and screaming lead. Yiska fought his way out through the vegetable garden, picking off 2 of Thornton's men before a bullet shattered his left elbow and made that arm useless. But he managed to reach the tree line as flames began consuming Clara's cabin. "Burn it all!" Thornton roared. "He's got to be inside." From the safety of the woods, Yiska watched Clara's home become a funeral pyre. She stood in the yard surrounded by armed men, tears streaming down her face as everything she owned turned to ash. The woman who might have been his ally had been turned against him by the cruelest weapon of all, a mother's love for her child. But as the flames died down, Clara broke free from her guards and ran toward the woods where Yiska had disappeared. "I'm sorry," she screamed into the darkness. "God forgive me, I'm so sorry." Her brother Tom emerged from behind the burning cabin, counting silver dollars with satisfaction. The man who'd sold out his own sister looked pleased with his night's work, but his expression changed when Thornton approached with cold eyes. "What about Clara?" Tom asked nervously. "You said she wouldn't be harmed." "She made her choice when she warned the Indian." Thornton replied matter-of-factly, "Natural consequences." Understanding dawned on Tom's face as he realized what he'd done. But it was too late for regrets. The damage was complete, and Clara's life now hung by the same thread as her daughter's. As midnight approached, Yiska faced the harsh reality of his situation. He was wounded alone and running out of time. The children would be separated in hours, half shipped to slavery, while the rest faced execution. Every potential ally had been compromised or eliminated. But he'd learned something crucial from the attack on Clara's cabin. Sheriff Morrison hadn't been present. The man who should have been leading the manhunt for a dangerous fugitive was nowhere to be seen. That suggested he was busy with something more important than capturing 1 wounded Indian. Something like preparing 20 children for transport to hell. The final assault would have to be a solo mission against impossible odds. But as Yiska checked his weapons and prepared for what might be his last battle, he thought about Emma's whispered words through the cellar window. She'd told him some of the little ones were sick, dying from their ordeal. Time was their enemy, as much as bullets and badges. He had one advantage: left desperation. The kind of desperate fury that had carried Lakota warriors against cavalry charges and made legends out of last stands. Judge Blackwood expected a tactical assault from a careful strategist. Instead, he was about to face the unleashed vengeance of a man who had nothing left to lose, except the promise he'd made to a dying sister. The storm was passing, but a different kind of tempest was building in the heart of Bitter Creek. Before this night was over, the town would learn that some promises are written in blood and sealed with lives. The abandoned silver mine stretched into the hillside, like the throat of some hungry beast, its rotting timber supports groaning under decades of accumulated water damage. Yiska crouched at the entrance, studying a hand-drawn map he'd taken from one of Thornton's dead men. According to the crude sketch, this mine connected to a network of tunnels that honeycombed the ground beneath Judge Blackwood's ranch. It was his only hope of reaching the children before they were separated and shipped to their various fates. But as he prepared to enter the mine, familiar voices echoed from deep within the tunnels. Well, right on schedule. Sheriff Frank Morrison emerged from the darkness, flanked by 6 armed men, and someone who made Yiska's blood freeze Mrs. Henderson, the supposedly helpful boarding house owner who'd been feeding him information from the beginning. "Surprised to see me, Mr. Crow Feather?" Morrison asked with cold amusement. "You shouldn't be. Every move you've made, every person you've contacted, every plan you've hatched, I've known about it all." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her grandmotherly mask replaced by something calculating and cruel. "Did you really think I was helping you out of the goodness of my heart? Judge Blackwood pays well for reliable intelligence." The betrayal was complete. From the moment he'd first arrived in Bitter Creek, Yiska had been dancing to their tune, following a script written by his enemies. Every clue he discovered, every ally he'd found, every piece of information that had led him closer to the children, all of it had been orchestrated to bring him to this moment. "The children," Yiska said quietly. "Where are they really?" Morrison smiled like a shark scenting blood. "Oh, they're here, right behind me, in fact." As if summoned by his words, Emma and 5 other children were pushed into view. Their hands bound, their faces bearing the vacant stare of the deeply traumatized. But something was wrong, and there should have been 20 children, not 6. "Uncle Yiska." Emma's voice was barely a whisper, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. "I'm here, little bird." He replied, his heart breaking at the sight of her condition. "Where are the others?" Yiska demanded. "Already en route to Mexico." Morrison replied casually. "These 6 were selected for special handling. Some have proven resistant to training. Others know too much and represent security risks that must be eliminated." Emma's eyes found his across the mine entrance, and he saw something in them that shattered his soul, not just fear, but the terrible understanding that death was coming. She was trying to be brave for his sake, but her small body was trembling like a leaf in a winter wind. "Here's what's going to happen," Morrison continued. "You're going to walk deeper into this mine, where an unfortunate cave-in will claim all 7 lives. Tragic accident, of course. Local Indian goes mad with grief, takes innocent children hostage, perishes when his hiding place collapses. But before anyone could move one of the traumatized children, a 12-year-old girl named Rose suddenly spoke up with surprising clarity. Now would be good, Tommy." The boy standing next to her, the 7-year-old who'd been playing the part of a broken victim, pulled something from his pocket and hurled it toward the mine support beams. The dynamite exploded in a shower of rock and splinters, bringing down a section of the tunnel roof between the children and their captors. In the chaos that followed, Yiska realized the truth. Rose and Tommy weren't just survivors. They were leaders who'd been organizing resistance among the captive children. Their apparent trauma had been an act designed to make their captors underestimate them while they planned their escape. "This way," Rose shouted, grabbing Emma and leading the group deeper into the mine as bullets ricocheted off stone walls. But Morrison wasn't finished. As the dust settled, he stepped through the debris with murder in his eyes. "Clever little bastards. But it doesn't matter. These tunnels all lead to dead ends, and I know every inch of them. The sheriff's revelation hit Yiska like a physical blow. Morrison wasn't just part of the conspiracy, he was the architect of it. The trafficking network wasn't centered on Judge Blackwood. It was Morrison's operation from the beginning, with the judge serving as a useful front man. Surprised again. Morrison laughed. Cornelius thinks he's running the show, but he's just another employee. The real money comes from clients in Chicago, New York, even Europe. Men with refined tastes and unlimited resources. As gunfire echoed through the tunnels, Yiska began to understand the true scope of the horror. This wasn't a local operation, it was part of an international network trafficking children across multiple states and territories. Morrison commanded resources that dwarfed anything Judge Blackwood could muster. "You can't save them all," Morrison called out as the chase continued deeper into the mine. "But I'll make you a deal. Give yourself up now, and I'll make sure Emma dies quickly. Keep running, and I'll let my men have some fun with her first." The threat ignited something primal in Yiska's chest. With a Lakota war cry that echoed off stone walls like the voice of an avenging spirit, he turned to face his enemies in the darkness of the deep earth. The midpoint had revealed the true scope of the conspiracy and the identity of its real leader. But it had also shown him something else. The children weren't helpless victims waiting to be rescued. They were fighters who'd been preparing for this moment, allies he could count on in the battle ahead. Rose and Tommy had given him the gift of hope in the darkest possible moment. Now it was time to return the favor by showing them that some adults were worth trusting, worth fighting alongside. The war for 6 young souls had become something more, a battle between the forces of exploitation and the power of people who refused to surrender to evil, no matter how overwhelming the odds. The abandoned mine became a labyrinth of death as Yiska fought a running battle through its twisting passages. Rose had led the children deeper into the tunnel system, following markings that Tommy had been secretly making during his captivity. The boy had used his small size to explore areas the adults couldn't reach, mapping potential escape routes while pretending to be a broken victim. But Morrison knew these mines better than anyone, and he was using that knowledge to drive them toward a section where the tunnels narrowed to a single passage. Yiska realized with growing dread that they were being herded into a trap, a dead end, where Morrison could finish them all with a single explosive charge. There. Rose's voice echoed from ahead. Tommy found another way out. But as they reached the narrow opening, the boy had discovered disaster struck. Little Sarah, Clara's daughter, who had been among the children all along, suddenly collapsed, her fever-racked body finally succumbing to the infection that had been consuming her for weeks. "She's burning up," Emma whispered, cradling the younger girl's head. "Uncle Yiska, she's dying." The choice Yiska faced was brutal. In its simplicity, carry Sarah and slow their escape, allowing Morrison to catch them all or leave her behind to save the others. It was the kind of decision that defined a man's character, and Emma was watching to see what kind of man her uncle truly was. "We carry her," Yiska said firmly. "We all go home together, or none of us do." Rose nodded with grim approval. "Tommy, can you make it through that opening with Sarah?" The 7-year-old boy studied the narrow gap with the calculating eye of someone far older than his years. "If we go one at a time, I can pull her through. But it'll be slow." As they began the agonizing process of squeezing through the opening, Morrison's voice boomed through the tunnels behind them. "There's nowhere to run, children. These passages all connect to the main mine, and I've got men waiting at every exit." That's when Yiska heard something that made his blood run cold, Clara's voice calling out from somewhere in the tunnel system. "Sarah, Sarah, where are you?" Morrison's laughter echoed off the stone walls. "That's right, Mrs. Whitmore. Your daughter is here and she's dying. But if you help me capture the Indian, I might let you hold her before the end." Clara had somehow escaped from the men guarding her at the burned cabin and followed them into the mine. But she was walking into the same trap that threatened to claim them all. "It's a trick," Rose whispered as they pulled Sarah's unconscious form through the narrow opening. Morrison's using her mother to make her give up. But Emma had a different idea. No, she said quietly. It's our chance. Mrs. Clara doesn't know about the other way out. If she creates a distraction, Yiska understood immediately. Clara's arrival could draw Morrison's attention while they completed their escape. But it would also put the grieving mother directly in harm's way. I can't ask her to sacrifice herself for us, he said. You don't have to ask, came Clara's voice from the shadows nearby. She'd found their hiding place and overheard the conversation. Sarah is my daughter. Saving her is my choice to make. Clara's face was streaked with soot and tears, but her eyes held the terrible resolve of a mother who'd lost everything except the chance to die for her child. She knelt beside Sarah's fevered form, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. Mama's here, baby girl, she whispered. Mama's going to make sure you get out of this place. Before anyone could stop her, Clara was moving back toward the main tunnel, calling out to Morrison, I'm here. I'll trade myself for the children. The sheriff's voice came back immediately. Now that's more like it. Come on out where I can see you, Mrs. Whitmore. As Clara walked toward certain death, Yiska made his own impossible choice. He pressed his Colt into Rose's hands, the weight of it almost too much for the 12-year-old to manage. Get them out, he told her. Follow Tommy's marks to the surface. There's a marshal named Wade in Cheyenne who'll listen to you if you tell him everything. What about you? Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. I'm going to make sure Mrs. Clara doesn't die alone, Yiska replied. And I'm going to end Morrison once and for all. The final confrontation was approaching, and Yiska knew it would cost him everything. But as he looked at the 6 children who depended on him, Emma Rose, Tommy Sarah, and 2 others whose names he'd learned during their flight, he realized that some prices were worth paying. Clara's scream echoed through the tunnels as Morrison's men captured her, and Yiska knew his time had run out. The second obstacle had revealed the true cost of heroism. Sometimes saving innocent lives required sacrificing your own. But that was a trade he was willing to make as long as Emma and the others reached safety. His promise to Ayanna would be kept, even if he didn't live to see its fulfillment. The darkness of the mine stretched ahead, filled with enemies and impossible odds. But Yiska Crowfeather walked toward it without hesitation, carrying the love of a dead sister and the hope of 6 living children into the final battle. The main tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, where an old mining operation had carved out a cathedral of stone and shadow. Emergency lanterns cast dancing light across the walls, creating a hellscape of flickering illumination and impenetrable darkness. Sheriff Morrison stood in the center like a puppet master controlling his final act, Clara Whitmore bound and kneeling at his feet. Welcome to the last scene, Mr. Crowfeather, Morrison called out as Yiska emerged from the tunnel mouth. How fitting that it should end where it began in the dark, with innocent blood about to be spilled. 6 of Morrison's men flanked him in a semicircle, their rifles trained on the various tunnel entrances. But Yiska could see the weakness in their formation, and they were spread too thin, trying to cover too many angles. Morrison's arrogance had made him overconfident. Let her go, Yiska said quietly. Your quarrel is with me. Morrison's laugh echoed off the stone walls. Oh, but Mrs. Whitmore is essential to my plan. You see, I need witnesses to testify that you went mad with grief, took innocent hostages, and died in a tragic cave-in. Clara will play her part beautifully. But as Morrison spoke, something unexpected happened. A small explosive charge detonated near the chamber's far wall. Tommy's handiwork set while the adults were distracted. The boy had circled back through the tunnels using his knowledge of the mine's layout to position himself for a devastating surprise attack. In the chaos that followed, Rose appeared at another tunnel entrance with Sarah in her arms, no longer playing the helpless victim. Now, Emma, she shouted. Emma emerged from a third passage, moving with purpose despite her small size. In her hands was a piece of paper she'd secretly torn from Morrison's jacket during their earlier capture, a list of buyers and locations that would expose the entire trafficking network. "Looking for this," Emma called out, holding up the document that could destroy Morrison's empire. Morrison's face went white with rage. "You little bitch, give me that." But Emma had already tossed the paper to Yiska, who caught it and realized its significance immediately. Names, addresses, amounts paid. It was a complete record of the trafficking operation's clients and financial structure. "Kill them all," Morrison roared. No witnesses. The gunfight that erupted in the underground chamber was unlike anything Yiska had ever experienced. Muzzle flashes strobed in the darkness. Bullets ricocheted off stone walls with deadly unpredictability, and the thunder of gunfire was amplified to deafening levels by the enclosed space. But the children had planned for this moment. Tommy had placed explosive charges at strategic points throughout the chamber, creating confusion and cutting off escape routes. Rose used her knowledge of Morrison's men to predict their movements, calling out warnings that kept Yiska one step ahead of their attacks. As the battle raged, Clara broke free from her bonds and crawled toward where Sarah lay unconscious. The reunion between mother and dying daughter provided a moment of heartbreaking beauty amid the violence. But it also gave Morrison the opening he'd been waiting for. The corrupt sheriff drew a backup pistol and aimed it directly at Clara's head. "Enough!" he screamed. "Everyone stop shooting or the woman dies." In the sudden silence that followed, Morrison's voice was deadly calm. "Here's how this ends, Indian. You drop your weapons and surrender, or I blow her brains out. Then I'll kill the children one by one until you comply." But Emma had one more surprise. During the chaos, she'd worked her way around to Morrison's blind spot, and now she emerged from the shadows with a piece of mining equipment, a heavy iron spike used for breaking rock. "No," she said with quiet determination. "This is how it ends." The spike drove deep into Morrison's back, angled upward toward his heart, with the precision of someone who'd watched too many men die. The sheriff's eyes went wide with shock and pain as he turned to face his killer. "You," he gasped, "but you're just a child." "I'm Emma Crow Feather," she replied with dignity that transcended her years. "And nobody owns me." Morrison collapsed to his knees, blood frothing from his lips as life fled his body. But even in death, he had one final surprise. His falling weight triggered a dead man's switch connected to explosive charges throughout the chamber, a final act of spite designed to bring down the mine on top of everyone inside. "The whole place is coming down," Rose screamed as dust and debris began falling from the ceiling. Yiska grabbed Emma while Rose gathered the other children, and they ran for the main tunnel as the chamber collapsed behind them. Clara stumbled along with Sarah in her arms, the dying girl somehow finding strength in her mother's desperate love. They burst from the mine entrance just as the entire hill above it came crashing down, sealing Morrison's tomb forever. In the pre-dawn darkness, 6 children and 2 adults collapsed in the grass, gasping for air and struggling to believe they'd survived. But their ordeal wasn't over. Judge Blackwood's men were waiting outside the mine, having been alerted by the explosions. Thornton stepped forward with his gun drawn, murder in his eyes. Well, the whole family together at last. Judge Blackwood will be pleased to clean up this mess personally. That's when the sound of approaching horses cut through the morning air. Federal Marshal Benjamin Wade rode over the hill with a full company of cavalry, their uniforms and badges gleaming in the first rays of dawn. "Stand down, deputy," Wade commanded. "By order of the territorial government, you're all under arrest for conspiracy kidnapping and child trafficking." The final twist had arrived in the form of Tommy's secret message. During his captivity, the boy had used his knowledge of Morse code learned from his dead father to tap out distress signals that were picked up by a telegraph operator in a nearby town. The operator had relayed the coded message to federal authorities who'd been investigating reports of child trafficking in the territory. As Thornton and his men were disarmed and arrested, Yiska knelt beside Emma and pulled her into his arms. She was trembling with exhaustion and trauma, but alive. They were all alive. "Is it over, Uncle Yiska?" she whispered. "It's over, little bird," he replied, holding her close. "The monsters are gone, and you're safe now." But even as he spoke the words, Yiska knew that victory had come at a terrible price. Sarah was dying in her mother's arms, her small body finally succumbing to the infections and abuse she'd endured. Clara's tears fell like rain as she rocked her daughter, singing the lullaby she'd sung when Sarah was a baby. The climax was complete, but the cost of justice was written in a child's fading breath and a mother's broken heart. 3 weeks later, the territorial courthouse in Cheyenne buzzed with activity as federal investigators worked to unravel Morrison's trafficking network. The document Emma had stolen from the corrupt sheriff proved to be a treasure trove of evidence containing names and addresses that led to arrests across 5 territories. Yiska sat in the witness chair, his wounded arm in a sling, as he testified about everything he'd witnessed. Emma was beside him, no longer the broken victim, but a survivor whose courage had helped expose an empire of evil. The physical wounds were healing, but deeper scars would take much longer to fade. The network extended from Colorado to California. Marshal Wade explained to the packed courtroom. "We've identified over 300 victims in the past decade, with buyers in every major city from Chicago to San Francisco." Judge Blackwood sat in shackles at the defendant's table, his silver hair unkempt, his cultured mask replaced by the haggard face of a man watching his world collapse. Mrs. Henderson had already confessed to her role in the conspiracy, her testimony providing crucial details about the operation's structure. Clara sat in the front row, her face drawn with grief, but her eyes holding a peace that hadn't existed before. Sarah had died 2 days after their escape from the mine, but she'd lived long enough to know her mother loved her and had fought to save her. Sometimes that knowledge was enough. "What happens to the surviving children?" asked the territorial governor. "Those with families will be returned," Wade replied. "The orphans will be placed in carefully vetted homes with regular monitoring to ensure their safety." Emma's grip tightened on Yiska's hand at these words. When the court recessed, she pulled him aside with urgent questions. "Will they separate us?" she asked. "Never," Yiska replied firmly. "You're staying with me. That's a promise I'll keep until my dying day." "But what about Tommy and Rose? They don't have families either." It was a question that had been weighing on Yiska's mind. Both children had become like family during their ordeal, and the thought of separating them felt like another kind of cruelty. That afternoon, Marshal Wade approached with an unexpected offer. "The territorial government is forming a specialized unit to investigate crimes against children. We need someone with your skills and your understanding of how these predators operate." "I'm not a lawman," Yiska replied. "You're something better. You're a man who won't look the other way when children are in danger." "That's exactly what we need." Yiska glanced at Emma, who was playing with Rose and Tommy under Clara's watchful eye. All 3 children bore the marks of their ordeal, but there was also resilience there, a strength that spoke to the unbreakable nature of young spirits. "I'll consider it," he told Wade. As the formal proceedings continued, various families came to claim their rescued children. Some reunions were joyful, others complicated by the changes trauma had wrought. But Tommy and Rose remained unclaimed orphans, their futures uncertain despite their heroism. That's when Clara made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I'd like to adopt them," she said simply. "Rose and Tommy. They saved my daughter's life by including her in their escape plan, and they deserve a family who understands what they've been through." The paperwork was complex, but Marshal Wade expedited the process. Within a week, Clara Whitmore had become the legal guardian of 2 remarkable children who'd shown courage beyond their years. "We're like a tribe now," Emma observed as they all prepared to leave Cheyenne. "Not blood family, but chosen family." "The best kind," Yiska agreed. As they boarded the train that would take them back to Bitter Creek, Yiska reflected on how much had changed. Emma was healing, the trafficking network was destroyed, and justice had been served. But Sarah's death was a reminder that some victories came at an unbearable cost. The falling action had resolved the immediate crisis, but it had also raised new questions about the future. Where would they go from here? How could they rebuild their lives after such trauma? The answers would come in time, but for now, it was enough that they were together, alive and free. 6 months later, the cemetery outside Bitter Creek was peaceful in the golden light of late afternoon. Emma knelt beside 2 graves, her mother Ayanna's weathered headstone, and beside it, a smaller marker bearing Sarah Whitmore's name. She'd brought wildflowers, for both yellow for her mother and white for the friend she'd tried to save. "I brought them together, Mama," she said softly. "Sarah's not alone anymore, and neither are you." Yiska stood nearby, the federal marshal's badge catching the sunlight. In the month since accepting Wade's offer, he'd helped break up 2 more trafficking rings and rescued 37 children. The work was dangerous and heartbreaking, but it gave meaning to their survival. "Sarah would have liked that," he told Emma. "She always looked up to you in the mine, you know. Even when she was sick, she tried to be brave like you." Emma's smile was touched with sadness, but no longer broken by it. "Mrs. Clara says Sarah is watching over us now, making sure other children stay safe." Clara had found her calling in Denver, establishing a safe house for trafficking survivors. Rose and Tommy were thriving under her care, with Rose excelling in her studies and planning to become a teacher, while Tommy's inventive mind was already designing safety devices for children. Tommy sent another letter, Emma said, standing and brushing dirt from her dress. "He wants to show you his new invention when we visit next month." They walked together toward town, where Mrs. Henderson's boarding house had been converted into a school for war orphans and trafficking survivors. The elderly woman's cooperation with authorities had earned her a reduced sentence and a chance at redemption through service. As they reached the main street, a rider approached from the direction of the train station. Yiska's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, but he relaxed when he recognized Deputy Marshal Sarah Coleman, his partner in the Territorial Children's Protection Unit. "The word from Santa Fe," she called out. "4 children missing from an orphanage. Circumstances match our profiles." Yiska felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with each new case, but also the sense of purpose that made everything worthwhile. Somewhere, 4 children were facing the same horrors Emma had survived, and they needed champions. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Train leaves in 2 hours. Local marshal specifically requested our assistance." Emma had been listening with the serious expression she wore whenever Uncle Yiska's work was mentioned. She understood now what he did and why it mattered, though she still worried with each departure. "Will you be back for the Harvest Festival?" she asked. "I'll do everything I can." Yiska promised, embracing her. "Mrs. Henderson is looking forward to your presentation about children's safety." As they prepared for his departure, Emma pulled a letter from her pocket. "I wrote this for you to read on the train," she said. "It's important." At the station, Yiska hugged Emma goodbye and watched her ride away with Mrs. Henderson. She waved until they disappeared around a bend, and he felt the familiar ache of separation balanced by pride in her resilience. As the train pulled away from Bitter Creek, Yiska opened Emma's letter. "Dear Uncle Yiska, I know you're reading this while going to help more children. I wanted you to have something to remind you that you're not fighting alone. We are your family now, not just me, but Rose and Tommy and Mrs. Clara and all the children you've saved. We carry you in our hearts wherever you go, just like you carry us. Mama visits me in dreams sometimes. She says she's proud of both of us, and that her brother became the hero she always knew he could be. You kept your promise to her Uncle Yiska. You saved me, and now you're saving others. I have a secret to tell you. In the mine, when I stabbed Sheriff Morrison, I wasn't just being brave. I remembered something he said when they first took me, that children like us were worthless, that nobody would miss us if we disappeared. He was wrong. We matter. Our lives matter. Our pain matters. And our courage matters too. Come home safe, Uncle Yiska. Your family is waiting. All my love, Emma. P.S. Tommy designed a new safety whistle for children in danger. Rose is teaching younger kids how to recognize bad people. I'm learning to shoot so I can protect others someday. We're all following your example. Attached was a photograph of their unconventional family, Emma Rose, Tommy Clara, and himself taken at the Harvest Festival the month before. They were all smiling, even Clara, whose grief had transformed into purpose. As the train disappeared into the gathering dusk, carrying Yiska toward whatever battles awaited in Santa Fe, he tucked the letter carefully over his heart. Emma was right, he wasn't fighting alone. He carried with him the love and support of every child he'd saved, every family he'd reunited, every person who believed that protecting innocence was worth any sacrifice. Behind him, the sun set over Bitter Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and hope. The town had been transformed from a den of corruption into a beacon of healing where children could grow up safe and loved. Ahead lay new challenges, new monsters to hunt, new innocents to protect. But Yiska Crow Feather was no longer the desperate man who'd first ridden into town searching for one missing girl. He was a federal marshal, a guardian of the defenseless, most importantly, a man who'd learned that the greatest victories weren't won through violence, but through the refusal to let evil triumph over love. The story was complete. Emma was safe. The network was destroyed. Justice had prevailed. Every promise had been kept, every debt paid, every thread resolved. The resolution was absolute, the closure final. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the prairie, carrying hope toward whatever darkness awaited and the light that would surely drive it away.